200%. His call. No restrictions. And that is why the tax collectors had a reputation of ripping people off. Because they could charge whatever they wanted to. As long as the Roman authorities got their bit, they didn't care. But Matthew had to give up this government contract and perhaps all the other things that he ripped people off on to follow Jesus. We have some of the other disciples like Peter, James and John. They gave up their family business. It was a fishing business to follow Jesus. Some of the women that followed Jesus, some of them seem to be well-to-do women. They actually funded Jesus' ministry. You read through that. They funded it. So you think about it, you've got 12 or 13 people travelling around all over the country. They're not having a set job, as it were. They have to be supported some way. They have to be fed. Sometimes people may have taken them into their homes. Other times they may have stayed in the they travelled around. This was their ministry. And so Jesus' ministry was supported by people. They sowed into that. You see, discipleship costs. And then Jesus throws another thing in the mix. He says this, yes, there's praise, but then Jesus makes this statement in John 14:15 and in many other places as well. He says this, well, if you love me, keep my commands. Oh. It's all free, my salvation is free, but then Jesus says to me, but if you love me, do what I say. Notice the word love coming in there. And if you begin to unpack this a whole lot more, you begin to get the picture. Because the relationship that we have with Jesus is a love relationship. And when you love somebody and you really support them, you don't want to hurt them. Jesus says, if you love me, you'll keep my commands. People had a problem getting a handle on this. Paul actually had to write to the church in Rome. And he was writing to this church because some of them were using the grace card as a get out of hell card. They were thinking, well, just as I said before, well, that means that yes, I can come to church, I can put my hand up and I can say I accept Jesus, I can even pray at the front, I can even fall over, but then the rest of the week, well, if I blow it, it's called grace. Now, this is what he wrote. In Romans 6 and verse 1, he says, what shall we say then? Shall we go on sinning so that grace may increase? He's saying, what are you saying? Do you keep on sinning so that you get more and more grace? So you show the greatness of God's grace? He said, you've got to back the front. It's not the way it's supposed to be. It's not the way it's supposed to be. He says this in verse 14 of that very chapter, as he unpacks it all, and he begins to describe what it means to get baptized. When you say you're getting baptized, you're actually making a public declaration that you're turning from the old life and you're following after Jesus Christ wholeheartedly. And he begins to unpack all of that. And then he ends up in verse 14 by saying this, for sin shall no longer be your master, because you're not under law, but under grace. Sin shall no longer be your master. And he's saying, why? Because you see, if you want to live by the law and tick all the boxes, guess what? You're going to miss some of the boxes. What happens about the ones you missed? If you want to live under law and leave it that way, say, oh, it's one of the things that I'm doing, I'm kind of going to get there. Then what happens about the ones you've missed? But he says, no, sin shall no longer be your master, because you are actually under grace. And grace motivates me to do far more than what the law will do. The law will bring condemnation. Grace will bring conviction and help me to work forward. You see the difference? The law brings condemnation. Rules and regulations bring condemnation. Grace brings conviction, helps me to move forward. You've all gone very quiet. You're okay? Yeah. All right. I just want to say this, it's okay to say no. It's okay to say no. Paul was writing to another guy, and he's writing to this guy by the name of Titus. Titus was leading up a church on the island of Crete. Crete had a bad reputation in that era. It was classed as, if you were called a Cretan, then actually it's like a swear word. They were totally dysfunctional, they were totally violent, they were totally, you name it. They were considered as liars and cheaters. And guess what? Right in the middle of that kind of community, a church gets planted. It's just what God does. And people are getting saved out of that, but he's got to settle into them because they've got all this old thinking. And now they come embracing Christ, and there's a whole lot of new thinking that has to come into it now. And this is what he said to them. He says, "For by the grace of God has appeared that offers salvation to all people." Let's just stop there for a moment. The grace of God has appeared and offers salvation to all people. The grace of God is referring here to Jesus. Jesus appeared. He is called the grace of God. If you want to know what grace looks like, you look at Jesus. Because he's the embodiment of that. He's the embodiment of love. He's the embodiment of faithfulness. You see, Jesus is the author of grace. It's because Jesus came in the first place that you and I are here. It's because he came in the first place that we can run free, that we can worship him, that we can be set free from those things that hold us. Okay? And then it says this, and it teaches us, that is the grace, teaches us to say no to ungodliness and worldly passions, to live self-controlled, upright and godly lives in this present day, while we wait for the blessed hope, the appearing of the glory of our great God and Saviour, Jesus Christ. So he's saying here, grace is good. That's the reason we're here. But it helps us to say no to things. Now, I'll put a few things down here that just to give you an understanding of what this means. For instance, an ungodly pattern is something that can be trained into us. A pattern of being hurt or disappointed by others trains us to trust only ourselves. Isn't that right? If you want to live that way, you only trust yourself. You don't trust anybody. But what grace does, grace trains us to surrender control to a loving God. So you see the difference there. Why is there a difference there? Because I see what Jesus has done. And he's the embodiment of grace. A culture of immediate gratification trains us that we should have everything we want right now.